So my wife's not into crypto, but in 2019, when she would ask like, why do you still care about this? A lot of the things that you'd say were, well, if you could imagine this thing happening, you could imagine that thing happening, and if we only could do this, well, a lot of those things we've already done.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have John Cole, co-founder at Hyperlane. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with John at Hyperlane. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with John Cole, co-founder at Hyperlane. John, what's up? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a fun week, a sleepless week, but I'm excited and happy to be on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to chat. No, you guys have a ton of really cool stuff to talk about today. So pumped to dive in on all that. But before we get to that, I'd love to talk about you a little bit because you're a managing director at Galaxy Digital, but you're also creating Hyperlane. So I'd love to, really, before we even get to that, let's backtrack. How did you end up in Web3? What drew you to the space?
Oh, man, where to start? So I guess the thing that really primed me to be interested in crypto was that I had a lot of bad run-ins with banks, instances that leave you feeling like I just got screwed, and I grew up in Israel, specifically in Jerusalem. And if there's one thing, this was like a very fun and wonderful place, but the bureaucracy there is awful, just absolutely awful in every facet of life. And the banks treat you kind of like a piece of shit. Excuse my language. And so it all starts with, I'm like 16, 17 years old, and I'm working, and I have a terrible run-in with one of the two major banks. And that leaves me thinking like, man, I'd love to one day do well enough to where I buy this bank so I could fire everyone in this specific branch because they treated me as a teenager so poorly. I hate these people. And a few more bad run-ins throughout the years. And then worst of all, I come to America. I've been living here for, 12, 13 years now, and I've loved it, and I love America. And one of the things I always used to tell my Israeli friends about is like, you won't believe how good the banks are. I go into Wells Fargo, and they give me a chocolate and a water, and everyone's nice and kind. And if you remember the Wells Fargo account scandal where they opened...
Oh, man, yeah.
Well, so that was in the LA area, and I'm one of those people. And so...
No way.
Yeah. And so that one was like really the thing, like made me lose a whole lot of faith in the system and made me think like, man, I really would like to just change the financial system in some way. I know it sounds like crazy, right? But I'm going to school afterwards at UC Berkeley, and there, like, you either, if you weren't on the tech side, if you weren't an engineer, you were going to one of two places, a consulting firm or a Wall Street firm. And down that path, I ended up at Morgan Stanley thinking, you got to know the system if you're going to change it. So you got to go straight to the heart of the beast. You got to go into Wall Street. And while I'm there, spring of 2016, a close friend from school comes up to me and like, with all seriousness, is like, John, I'm going to put all my money into this thing called Ethereum. The friends are buying it. What do you think? And like, he's asking me because, I work on Wall Street. I'm like a bond trader. Presumably I know something about something, and that's why I should have a good answer. And I'm like, I don't know. It's a good idea. I don't know. It's a bad idea. And we spend a bunch of time on it that weekend, and I like get totally Ethereum pilled, specifically because there was like, I don't remember the exact wording, but there was like a line somewhere that was saying how smart contracts could just be programmatic financial services providers. And that, like, someone who was doing it more manually on a trading desk every day, like, I was like, oh my God, we're all going to be out of a job. This is so cool. And so I was primed to like it. And then from 2016 on, I just was more and more pilled, become a small time miner by 2017. And then I looked for my first opportunity, not knowing anyone or really anything about crypto. And I found Passport Capital, which was an awesome macro hedge fund in San Francisco that was opening up its crypto arm. And I was the first hire and had like great timing. I basically joined right as early 18 when the market collapsed, and I've been in crypto ever since. So we're going up on 6 years now.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. So, you've had this kind of uncommon experience of both investing and building in Web3 at this point. And so I'm curious about the interplay there. Like specifically, are there any ways in which the investing work you've been up to thus far made the Hyperlane opportunity kind of apparent enough for conviction to move forward?
Totally. So before starting Hyperlane, I spent a few years at Galaxy, like you said, as a managing director, was co-leading the investment team there with my great friend Michael Jordan, who has since started a firm called DBA, which is excellent. Highly recommend working with them if you're a founder thinking about who to work with. And I thought that like once I got turned on to these internet computers, these cool blockchains, I really thought like it's a given that they would just work with each other. And that obviously became not a given at all, right? There's hard engineering problems that make it that way. And just as an investor, kept on the lookout all the time for what is going to be an amenable solution here. And so from the earlier days with things like Polkadot's XCMP and IBC and Cosmos, just kept an eye out and tried to learn everything I could, to later on with Wormhole and Axelar and others. But the time of in 2021, it felt like, okay, so the market's settling on a few solutions here, but they all seem to me to be just like kind of like a V1 solution for crypto, one that doesn't feel totally crypto native. It was just about like, hey, people want to, what are they trying to do? They want to interact with something on a different chain. And to do that, they need the asset there. So let me help them drag the asset there. But the vision for Hyperlane came more from like, well, that's just the proximate thing. The real action is they want to interact with this other app, this other chain. How can we make that easier for them? And so the original idea for what later became Hyperlane was like, how can we create an experience where the same way that when you go on like an app like Uber, you don't think of, wait, is my function call that's happening in the background here, is that executed on like AWS West 7, or is it happening on like, GCP cluster Southeast 9? Like no one cares. But in crypto, you kind of do care because you have to, because you're interfacing directly with the server and you're inputting the like computational units directly. And so that felt like no mature technology really presents itself to end users in this way other than crypto. And so I think this is kind of like a intermediary step towards a more mature thing. And so it's not going to be magic that gets us there. I've by now been an investor for like 5+ years, and you could see how like these things happen by the sweat, blood, and tears of the technologists that build this stuff. And it's like, well, someone's gonna have to do it. And had the good fortune of running into the people who would later, help us build Hyperlane, and my co-founders here, like Naam, who is just, absolute star and just a pleasure to work with. And that starts us on this journey to where we are today.
Amazing. Okay. So let's do it. Let's talk about Hyperlane. I'm curious, like in your own words, how would you describe or explain what Hyperlane is and what it's working to enable?
Great question. So I love these ones that are all about like, put it simply, because I'm a simpleton myself. So I think in the simplest terms, what Hyperlane is and what we want it to be is the thing that just lets anyone connect any chain, right? Like we have these networks, they are really cool, they do very cool things, but right now it's still such an involved process that often involves asking for permission, asking for someone to help you, to do something for you to be able to connect your chain or someone else's chain with any other. And so what is Hyperlane? It is the thing that just lets anybody connect any chain and is agnostic as to like which protocols it's connecting, and just has a simple framework for, hey, if you do these things and you get them to compile on these two chains, they'll be able to talk. And once they can do that, you can move assets between them. You could have function calls between them. And ultimately, you could present an experience to a user that doesn't necessitate that they know if they're on, AWS West 7 or what other server they're on, right? They are just doing the thing they want it to do.
Love it. Okay. So you've kind of described this vision of permissionless interoperability and talked a little bit about why it's valuable. I'm curious, maybe downstream, like what happens in the crypto space if there is kind of this, I think I came across in it might have been the Hyperlane blog, this description of like a Uniswap for bridges. If that's fully operational and at scale, what happens to crypto?
That's a great question as well. I guess let's take a one step back. And so what's an issue we run into as people in this industry who really care about it and want to see it grow, want to see it actually become its full potential, which is an alternative financial system? Well, every time we reach a little bit of demand, we run into the same issue of scaling troubles, right? We've seen it in 2017 and 18. We've seen it again in 20 and 21. We are bound to be seeing it again soon. Why does it always happen? It happens because blockchains, like by design, constrain digital resources, right? Like every block is kind of like a bus, and there's only so many seats on it. And kind of like Uber, we use surge pricing to decide who's going to get on that next bus. And so the easy solution, right? Like add more block space, add more buses, but it's not very accessible to get to those buses. And so we know we have this goal. We want to make crypto bigger. We have a proximate solution, like let's add more block space to be able to handle those demand surges. We don't have like, how do I get to those extra buses? How do I do it easily? Like, why is it a fucking slog every time? And so with something like Hyperlane, operational and fully at scale, you have the ability to connect to this block space easily, on demand, and ultimately what that serves to do, right? So crypto needs to get bigger. A solution to handle the demand problems is to offer more supply of block space. Now you need to make that block space easily accessible, easily navigable. And so we need some type of easy to use framework and standard for how all these things can connect and talk to each other. And Hyperlane aims to be just that. It's why we've opted for this permissionless design that anyone can convert to a language of their choosing. And through that, you're already seeing, right? So Hyperlane, just this week, we're talking, on early November, just this week, we had our first foray into the world of Cosmos after being live in the EVM world. Have support for Solana now. That we also have support coming for Move and several other more, call it like lesser known VMs, but that are still really applicable. And almost all of those additional, VM support is coming from other people. It's not the Hyperlane core team that's doing it. Obviously, we've written a spec and help people and help them troubleshoot as they're going through their implementation process. But it's others who are like, wait, I need a way to connect my chain, my environment, but it's not supported just yet. So let me go ahead and do the work, because I know that even if everyone on the Hyperlane core team got hit by a bus, I could still carry this forward. So that has enabled us to expand to, again, many more VMs to make this network, this network between the networks, this framework for connecting all of this block space, more of a reality. And it's still in its early days, right? Like there's still a lot of kinks to be worked out. There's still a lot to make the actual deployment process easier. And the core team is working on that tirelessly. But that's what it enables crypto to do. It does enable it to scale in a way that it hasn't before. Because yes, we can, right now we are able to offer more of this block space, but we are not making it very accessible and navigable. And that's what Hyperlane should serve to do. So in the real end game, if everything goes well, 5-6 years from now, no one is even remotely aware of the chains they're on. Gas management becomes kind of a thing of the past. It's not just that with things like account abstraction, you could pay, developers and businesses can pay on behalf of their users and charge them through a different model. It's also that the actual gas token abstraction happens in such a way where a system like Hyperlane can handle all of that on behalf of the end user, even on behalf of the developer, so that they're not concerned with it. And it really does feel like you're just there for the action you want to commit. You're just there for the app you want to interact with, and you don't have to first go through the server. Because today, when you interact with a crypto app, you first kind of interact with the server.
Love it. That's super, super helpful kind of breakdown of all that. Hey everybody, quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Now, let's get back to the show. So I'm curious, even just taking a step back, like, for any founders out there that are curious about just even the team building aspect, I'm curious how you went about sort of building the right team to implement this Hyperlane vision, because it seems like needs a variety of different people with the right skills, right? Like it's kind of a 0 to 1 kind of thing. And so I'm curious how you think about hiring for that kind of problem. Anything that might be useful for any other founders out there.
Yeah, so I love heist movies. I don't watch them enough because there's not enough time. But one of my favorite movies growing up was Ocean's 11. Best part of the movie, everyone's, or at least I think a lot of people's favorites, including myself, the crew formation. Right?
Oh
And
yeah,
what
definitely.
do they do
Me too.
in those heist movies? What do they always do? Like the first few people who come in, they're the generalists, right? They can do a little bit of everything. It's Danny and it's Rusty, and like they get I forget the name of like the Matt Damon character, but like they could do a little bit of everything. You just toss them at any job, and then you start getting into the hacker character. Then you start getting into the Don Cheadle, right? Like the explosives guy. And I think the team construction for something like this, at least in our mind, is very much like that. It's the first few people. So, and mind you, when I'm saying this, I'm going to refer mostly to engineering talent, but there are very specialized engineering talents, and then there are very generalist ones. And so I think your first 3 or 4 really need to be complete generalists, and not just they need to be folks who first are very good at something, right? So in the case of, you want to get someone who is very good writing smart contracts and has a very, very good understanding of how different blockchains actually work from a how the sausage is made perspective. But they also need to be able to pick up new things very quickly. I'll give you an example. 2 of our first members on the crew fit that description to a T. They were very good at understanding blockchains when they came aboard, but had mostly been in the EVM world. Within a year, both of these people now have high command of Rust and have a pretty good understanding of how different VMs and different chains, right, like different types of Cosmos chains, different, and even chains like Solana, how those work and operate. And as you expand, you get your, 3 to 4 can-do generalists, and also attitude. I think is, if you're starting a young start, get yourself as many can-do people as you can. Folks who everything is kind of a grind with them, and you always need to persuade them to do everything. That's just not going to work well for your first few hires. And so certainly we didn't have too much of that. You just get people who are bought in. After you have those core, now you'll start running into, what are the specialist problems that I have? Do I need, okay, so maybe we do need a Don Cheadle, right? We need someone who knows exactly how to do this very specific thing and is world-class at it. And so that's kind of that team construction. And I think not enough people, everyone wants to say we only hire the best, but like that's impossible. There's lots of companies and they're all hiring lots of people. So now it can't be that everyone's only hiring the best, right? There has to be there's got to be a line somewhere, like unlike what, Saylor likes to say, there is a second best and a third best and a last best, right? Someone has to not be the best. And so you got to keep a firm handle on this concept of talent density. How does the next addition to your team impact your talent density? And ideally, it stays the same or gets higher. Talent density, just right, like we have 10 people. Out of those 10, how many are A's? How many are B's? What's the average grade that you'd put on it? And so that average grade is kind of like your talent density. And so how do you keep that at worst constant? And you strive to keep it very high. And I think that the thing that is very easy to get sucked into is like, man, we have this big need right now. We need our Don Cheadle, our bomb guy. We need him right now, and so we're just going to hire one of the first 5 that we find, because finding great people is hard. Well, I think you run into more trouble than not, and it's a very easy mistake to make. It's certainly one that lots of great teams make. We've made before. I think it's worth taking, that adage about hiring slowly. It is true. It feels frustrating as you're going through it, because it's like, I just wish we had this, we need our bomb guy. We need our extra special gymnast who could fit into tight spaces or whatever. But, everyone will know very quickly once you've settled, because when there is a big discrepancy in either the attitude or the aptitude of someone new on your team, and those things don't quickly adapt, it becomes very noticeable very quickly, and so it makes it harder for everyone involved.
Yeah, yeah. This honestly sounds like terrific advice across the board on all that. So, if it's okay with you, I'd love to maybe turn to some more general questions, kind of about crypto in general, because this is kind of an interesting moment, right? I'm curious. First question, maybe how you kind of view state of the union of crypto these days. It's kind of an interesting time with the news of SBF right now. I think for the public that had a particular resonance last year, obviously, and then so yeah, just where are we at? How should people think about the season we're in and moving into?
Oof. Well, I'd say insofar as the season that we're in, it's the use actual seasons. It really does feel like we are either of spring, or we are getting, a warm spell during a winter. It's one of those two, but I feel like the light is certainly at the end of this tunnel until we get our next cycle, because our industry is incredibly cyclical because of its financial nature. I think everyone wants to see that activity and everything would keep going up despite the volatility, but I think there is similar volatility and activity as there is in asset prices. Not to say that it's one to one, and so that's kind of how I think about it at the moment. I was at a dinner the other night and someone asked, like, hey, it's not your first rodeo in crypto. Like, how does it feel? Was 2019 as bad as things are now? And my view immediately was bad now. Oh my gosh, you don't even know. It is wonderful now. I would say, relative to 4 years ago, everything is so much better, so much more optimistic. And certainly if you talk to the older heads about 2015, they'll tell you that 2019 as a low point was so much more happy and cheerful and optimistic than 2015 was. Right? And I think in every time, so in 2019, the industry shrunk by a lot. It was a great washout where a lot of the what I'd call the interlopers or the tourists went back to the things that they were doing before. The people who were only interested in this industry insofar as it stood to make them very wealthy kind of went and went to do other things. And those of us who are more motivated to this in some ideological level, we didn't want to go anywhere. We had nowhere to go, right? Like, I wasn't going back to work in a bank, right? Like, the only case that would be is if I couldn't make a living anymore, right? There's a family, you got to support them. But barring that, like, we're not leaving. You got to have to drag us out of here. And so there wasn't a lot, though, at the time to get excited about beyond this ideological movement and knowing, like, there's a lot of talented people and we're working with them and that feels great. 2023 feels remarkably different, right? There's so many more things. There's now the big gripe is like, where are the apps? Where are the apps? Like,
Right.
I don't know. There's so many things you can do on chain. Like, yes, it's true. Most of the things you do on the internet don't happen on chain. Like, okay, all right, well, you're doing more of them now than you did 4 years ago, and so
Right.
so I don't know. It feels like a great time. It feels very optimistic to me. Still, it feels an order of magnitude better because now, like, so my wife's not into crypto, but in 2019 when she would ask like, why do you still care about this? A lot of the things that you'd say were, well, if you could imagine this thing happening, you could imagine that thing happening, and if we only could do this, well, a lot of those things we've already done, right? Now, you can now use DeFi in like a real way. There's a lot to do there. Now you could honestly manage a financial life like pretty well by being mostly in crypto, and like that was not the case 4 years ago. So that's like a huge advancement to me. So you know, to summarize, I feel like, yeah, we're either in a warm spell of winter or just at the emergence of spring. I think there's a ton to be optimistic about. And to the people who are saying where are the apps, I'd say, your critique is valid. There's obviously more that we can do, and we're certainly all going to do that collectively. To say that we're in some barren wasteland, I think, is just kind of a misremembering or just a complete dishonest view of the history.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And also, I really like how you speak to kind of the secular trend from 2015 to 2019 to 2023, where if each time is getting better at its worst moment, that seems like a good sign, right? So I think, one question I'm really curious about is always, it's a bit of a recurring question on this podcast actually, but it's really just, if you could go back to the beginning of your crypto journey, and especially as the founder, say, like if you could give yourself advice from what you know now, yes, maybe as an investor too, but I'm curious, what do you wish you knew? What would you want to impart to yourself back then that might be useful to any listeners that maybe are earlier in their journey or kind of trying to think about this in a new way?
Oof. All right. So I'll start with what I wish I knew for myself for purely, self-interested reasons, and then stuff that I knew for myself that anyone else listening might also benefit from. So for myself, I wish I just would have taken as many risks with my career as I was, or basically like by being all into crypto, I was already taking on so much risk with like my time spent. I wish I'd done that like fully, right? And so there were moments where there were opportunities to either join or start things with an earlier place in my life. And I always felt like, well, if crypto goes sideways and I have this bet, like I'm not going to be able to recover. But now in retrospect, well, like I would have recovered mightily fine. So I wish that I matched, like there were certain things that I would have done different, like probably in terms of the opportunities that I pursued. But all in all, still very happy with how things have turned out. And then I've had a great time. Passport, had a great time at Galaxy, and still very friendly with the folks there. Now, to advice that is much more practical that other people could listen to. So, to the investors starting off, like things you want to keep in mind is everyone thinks that to be a good investor in crypto, you need to ask like all these hard technical questions. And, I remember even like when we were speaking to investors, people would kind of try and show you how smart they are by asking a lot of this kind of abstract stuff and network design stuff. And you know what no one really asks? No one asks, with very few exceptions. I'd say like one of the persons who I think is an actual black belt investor, they ask this. But no one asks like, how do you take your ideas from your head and turn them into products and get those products into the hands of your target audience? Like, how do you go about that
Right.
day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year? No one asks that. No one says, like,
Yeah, fascinating.
no one says, like, how are you going to uh, get this to your team? How are you going to like keep them motivated? Are you going to do daily stand-ups? Are you going to do like how are you going to do your sprints, if you do sprints or cycles or whatever it is you do? No one asks that. And I think, one thing that a friend of mine who was an older Wall Street guy who got into crypto even before me, and he said, the most interesting, he told me this in 2018, the most different thing about these two industries, especially as it pertains to investors in both crypto and the traditional finance world. On Wall Street, your beginning assumption is the person on the other side from me, the person on the other, side of the phone or on the other side of the table, they're full of shit and they're trying to screw me over. They're trying to like get me to end up with this thing in my hand that just stinks. That's the working assumption. And now through the conversation, I try to get to a point and see like, was that wrong? Is there a good opportunity here? Are they not trying to screw me? And crypto was the other way around, where like the initial assumption was this person is trying to give me the best thing in the world. I should take them at their word. I should totally believe everything they're saying. And later kind of like work to, are they trying to fuck me over? Are they a fraud? And digging through that. And so I think knowing now what I know now over all this time, and certainly what the industry has collectively learned, like you mentioned earlier with we could all probably benefit a little bit from that Wall Street skepticism.
Sure.
Because the nascent nature of industries like ours always lends itself to the entry of very unscrupulous and untrustworthy people. And we've had our fair share of those. And, certainly like a lot of us have been fooled by just wanting to bring that. So the operating ethos of Silicon Valley was one of trust and, not winning deals in the documents, but winning them by relationships and trusting the other side. And we brought that into crypto. And turns out that there's a lot more, bad players that come and take advantage of that. And so you gotta be more skeptical. You gotta still believe, like, if this thing really, really, really works, how big can it get? You don't want to focus on like the million reasons why a company will fail, because there are a million reasons. You want to focus on, well, if it works, how big can it get? And not enough investors nowadays bring that thinking. And just remember, like, if you're an early stage investor, you're there to take risks. You're there to take moonshots. You're not there to have like some consistent IRR. You're there for the few things that have massive impact, change the face of an industry, and have outsized returns. I think that thinking has gotten lost. Now, at the same time, for founders, the first thing to know before you even start, it's the hardest thing you're going to do. Don't do it because you think it's cool or glamorous. Do it because you are super into that problem that you're facing. Before you even like form the entity you're going to be working on, am I going to be happy with my life if I'm still working on this in 5 years? If it's not, if you even have to question that, then you're probably in for a rude awakening. You're not going to like it. If you're not into sacrificing a lot in your life, right, in your personal life, not into doing the long nights, the weekends, the unpleasant travel, like, just save yourself the trouble and don't get into it, because, I can tell you right now, every team is going to need to go through this. And if the leadership on a team is not doing this, like, there's no way you can expect the rest of the team to make that sacrifice. So that's really imperative. And unfortunately, both as an investor and now as a founder, I run into so many people who are just like, I didn't realize that this was going to take so much out of me. I don't know what to do now, right? Because like, people started the company, maybe they raised a little bit of money, and they're a year, 2 years into it, and they're like, this is really, really hard. I wish I knew more about how hard this is. I thought like the world was just going to come to me and I'm just going to build this thing and it's just going to work out great. And it does happen for some people, but this stuff is really, really hard. And I don't think that's appreciated. And so you got to make sure that you have a strong network of support around you, that you're willing to do it, and that you have what it takes to convince other people to join you on this hard journey, because without that, it's kind of doomed.
Love it. John, great advice. So last question here for you. What's your team working on right now? And what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey?
Ooh, yeah, that's always fun to talk about. So the biggest things that we've been working on recently, and we'll be continuing to work on the short term here, are our expansion in the modular ecosystem and the expansion of this concept of permissionless interoperability. So our good friends at Celestia just had their mainnet launch a few days ago on the 31st, which was amazing. With their help and the folks at Neutron and a few others like the Mitosis team, we've created what we call Nexus. And Nexus is meant to be that first user interface for folks hoping to dive into the modular ecosystem. And it allows them to move assets into these new rollups that are tied to Celestia. So we just launched one that allows the Celestia asset TIA to be bridged over into a rollup called Manta Pacific. So that's live on usenexus.org. And you can expect new assets, new rollups to be added to Nexus. If you are a rollup creator or just anyone who wants to get their chain added to Nexus, hop in the Hyperlane or Neutron Discords and reach out, and we can get you added there. We are also in the midst of upgrading Hyperlane and producing the new version that is V3. V3 is really nice because it makes using Hyperlane even easier than it has been before, in the sense that it's less function calls to send the message now. You have to do less to worry about, like paying for gas fees. There's a singular interface there that's much easier. V3 also lets you much more easily tap in to additional security options. So you could use Hyperlane as a singular interface, but then end up sending messages through Axelar, through the canonical rollup bridge. Let's say if you're sending something to Arbitrum. And so we call that feature hooks. And so through hooks, there's a lot more stuff that you can do with Hyperlane. You could do it before, but before it required a lot of custom building, which, that's a nice to have, but it's always easier if you present someone with like a singular interface to do that. So that's what hooks represent. Beyond that, I expect new network support, again, guided mostly by Hyperlane's permissionless interoperability, as many more rollups and chains are adding Hyperlane to their networks. And if you want to stay up to date with it all, the two best places to do that are, of course, with the Twitter account. That's Hyperlane_XYZ. I guess it's called X now, so it's on X. Or through our Discord that you can access by going on discord.com/hyperlane, or sorry, discord.gg/hyperlane. That'll get you into our server. There's a pretty active community of Hyperlane builders there, and you can chat with them and chat with the rest of the core team about what you're building and get support and get all the most recent updates.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for all this. I mean, fascinating perspectives, but also some battle-tested wisdom and insight here. So one of my favorite episodes of late, and really grateful for your time.
Same here. This was a pleasure.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and maybe give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations with the most interesting crypto founders, investors, and builders from across the world. Thanks so much. Have a good one.